So,
hi everybody.
So Alan, if you would just take a minute and just tell us about yourself, your family, and why you are passionate about helping group leaders and churches with groups.
Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to. So my name's Alan White. We live in the Kansas City area. We just moved back here after being away for almost 38 years. And so my wife and I have been married 21 years. I met her when I was on staff at a church in California. And then we have 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. So the oldest is 20, the youngest is 8. So that keeps things kind of alive and active and around our house. I'm passionate for groups for a couple of reasons. One is that I see, life change happening best in the environment of a group. It's not just a matter of learning something cognitively, but it's also a matter of having that group around you that's cheering you on and praying for you and holding you accountable. The other thing I believe in groups is that I think a lot of people have potential to lead a group and they don't think that they do, or they don't know that they do. And I like drawing out that potential and watching them thrive. So that's a big part of why I do what I do.
Wonderful. So you work with a lot of churches around the country. I mean, you've literally worked with, I think, thousands of churches around the country. What are some good things that you are seeing right now, particularly as it relates to group life in churches? What are some common challenges that you're seeing among churches these days? Yeah,
no, that's a good question. I am only working with 20 right now, but I have worked with over 1,500 over the last 17 years. It's interesting because a lot of what churches are experiencing really has to do with a community's response, or wherever they're at with COVID has been a big part of that. So the good side of that, if there is a good side of it, is that a lot of groups they're skewing smaller, 3 or 4 people, because they want, to be with people that are kind of handling things the way that they are. And it's been a good opportunity just to get people to get a couple of friends and to start a group. Obviously, the downside is that no church really has the numbers that they're used to having in the past. Part of it is because, we've been all told to stay separate, and they've been doing that. But the other part of it is people have fallen out of the habit of getting together. And so I am finding an importance in connection. And so if there are people on your rosters for your group that you haven't seen for a while, because they didn't want to meet online, or, they aren't sure about things or whatever, keep after them. I always tell my leaders that if they're on your roster, they are yours. And so call them, text them. They don't have to come to the meeting, but to give them some kind of a connection, some kind of an encouragement, so that somebody's thinking about them. Somebody cares about them. And of course, if you don't like them, then you can let them drop off your list. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you. So if you could help group leaders do one thing better, what would it be?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and this leads to another question that you gave me, is stop doing everything yourself. Just stop doing everything yourself. Get other people involved in doing something. And what it does is it moves the group from being your group to being our group. And you have a person that rarely shows up to your group, and you know the group would be good for them. You know that they should be there. Well, move the group to their house. Then they have to be there. Or somebody calls and says, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm coming or not." And you say, "Oh, well, I was expecting you to bring some sodas or bring some coffee." "Oh, you need me to bring something?" "Well, I'll be there." And even down to, passing around the leadership. But I think a lot of small group leaders, we feel like, okay, we need to care for people. But in caring for people, we don't have to do everything for people. I've actually blogged about it recently, of challenging churches, more the idea of the old Home Depot motto that you can do it, we can help. So even in your small group, they can do it and you'll help them. And I think it'll be a good experience for them. And you might be able to see, who potentially has the stuff to maybe lead a group on their own someday.
Very good. Yeah. So how about this one? How do we help people in our groups open up and really share what's going on in their lives. Do you have any little tips there that we can do as hosts to make people feel more comfortable to do that?
Well, I think the first question is, do your leaders really want that? Really? I'm being silly. I think that there was an old saying in groups that said, speed of the leader, speed of the team. So your group, your members will be about as vulnerable as you are. So if you're sticking to the book and asking the questions and giving the Bible answers and straight down the line, then that's kind of where the group is going to go. They're going to follow your lead on that. Now, if you're wanting to share your whole story with them, you probably need to share it in doses, because most people can't take our whole story because it's a lot. But it is important to get to know each other's story. And I know sometimes we think, oh, we have these little icebreakers, and if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Like, I'd be a cactus, so leave me alone. Right? But part of that is in getting to know each other, because how they respond in a group and what they say in the meeting has a lot to do with how you perceive them, comes from what you understand about them. Because their comment may mean one thing on its surface, but in the context of their life and their story, you can really only understand what people are saying in the context of their story. So start out by telling your story. And again, you may have to do several rounds of this. You may not want to give them all the good, bad, and the ugly. But on the other hand, if you're reluctant to open up and share, then they will also be, reluctant to open up and share. And a lot of times we want to hide the things about our lives that are embarrassing to us, mistakes that we've made, sins that we've committed, things that we've done that, we're not proud of. And yet, if we're vulnerable about our weaknesses and let people know, hey, I'm not perfect. Our marriage is not perfect. Our family is not perfect, but God is working on us, and this is what we were, and this is where we're going. People can relate to our imperfections. People can relate to our weaknesses. People actually have a difficulty relating to our strengths. And so we come off as strong and polished and everything's in place. Even when you're setting up for a meeting, it's okay to leave something undone. It's okay to leave something out of place. Because if you were to, take a camera around everybody else's house, there's something that's undone, unless they're particularly OCD, but we're not going to get into that.
Right. Yes. So how about this? We know our ultimate goal is not just to have a meeting. We know that those meetings have a purpose, and the purpose is growing disciples, life transformation. What are things we should keep in mind as group leaders to help move it from just a meeting to something that's really having an impact in people's lives?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When I was coming up, and I been a Christian almost 50 years, and I'm only going to be 57 next year, but 50 years. And when I was a kid, you went to Sunday school and you learned all the stories on the flannel graph, and you had the right answers, and they told you there was actually a song that said, read your Bible, pray every day, and you will grow, grow, grow. You guys know that song? And the reality was, those are good things, but left to themselves, you could have a lot of the right answers and live completely in the wrong way. Because you knew all the stuff, but you didn't necessarily do all the stuff. So a few years ago, I was tooling through my Bible in the coming across the Great Commission. Actually stopped and read it. And so go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all the things that I commanded you. And I stopped in my tracks and I said, when did they put the word obey in there? And so I went back and looked at several other versions of the Bible, because I thought, maybe some Bible translator had goofed it up. And other versions of the Bible said observe, and I don't know if I got out my Greek stuff or not, but it all came down to obey. And I thought, we're doing this Christian education thing all wrong, because we're teaching people Jesus's commandments, hoping that they'll have half of a clue and they'll start doing something about it. But that's not what Jesus told us to do. Jesus told us to teach them to obey. Well, all of a sudden, that kind of put the warning signs up in the back of my head, because I grew up in a church that was fairly legalistic. And it's like, I don't want to bring back all those lists of things that you can do and things that you can't do and people you can't hang out with. And I thought surely that's not, where Jesus wants to go. But this idea of these things that we read in the Bible, and sometimes we get frustrated with ourselves because, we read things, we know them, but it's hard to do them. It's hard to, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Now, if we turned that around the other way, to be quick to become angry, we'd have it. That'd be awesome. But how is it we do that? Well, we need other people around us to help us, to encourage us, to guide us, to be examples. One of the definitions of a disciple, is certainly a follower, and is certainly a learner or a student. But another definition is the idea of to rub off on. And so there's this thing about, as God is working in me and God is working in you, and we get together in a group, we're rubbing off on each other, and none of us has to be perfect to do any of that. But how do we teach to obey? Well, there are 613 commandments in the Bible. And Matt, I'm assuming all of your people have all 613 commandments memorized, right? Okay, they're like, what, 613? Well, Jesus gave us a cheat sheet. They said, which is the most important commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the other commandments rest on these two. And so Jesus took it from 613 to 2. And so we can do that. So how do we love God, and how do we love each other and truly love them? And so if those are the commandments that are front and center, Jesus said everything else, depends on this, and we are to obey his commandments. Then we need to start focusing on that, not just intellectually, but also practically. And, it's intellectually, it's easy to love people. Practically, it's very hard to love people because some people are very difficult to love. And yet, this is what God challenges us to do. In fact, there's really nobody he says not to love. So that's kind of my take on discipleship. I know that's a lot. The other thing that I would say, I would add one more thing, is, God gave us a book and God gave us a brain. That's not a coincidence, okay? And God gave us a brain that understands things that God would communicate to us, which is kind of mind-blowing. But the other part of it is, that's not the only way that we learn. We learn through our relationships. We learn through our circumstances. We learn through doing things. We learn through enduring painful situations. There's all kinds of different ways that we learn. And so as a group, I would challenge you to have different experiences together, or to do different kinds of things together. Don't get away from your Bible study, because that's core, that's central. But also find other ways for your group to interact, and go out and find an opportunity to serve the poor, or spend some time praying together, or go on an outing together. I had a group when I was on staff at a church in Greenfield, South Carolina. They went on a cruise together. Oh, now ears are perking up. They went on a cruise together, and when they were on the cruise, they met another couple from Greenville, and when they got back, that couple joined their small group. And so they came to me and they told me this exciting story, and I thought it was really great. They said, so really, our cruise fare should be considered a ministry expense, and we're wondering if we could take that off of our taxes. I said, I'm not getting involved in that. That's between you and the Lord and the IRS. I want nothing to do.
Yeah, so I hear you saying a lot of things there that I really like about discipleship. I mean, one is discipleship happens through proximity. So we don't have to be perfect, but if we have a vibrant, growing relationship with the Lord, that rubs off.
Yes.
On people, and we need to nudge towards the obedience part of Scripture study, not just learning more, but what am I going to do with it?
Yeah, and as you're building relationships, because if you don't have relationship with someone and then you call them on something or try to straighten them out, well, that's going to come across as very intense and creepy and legalistic and all that. But
Right.
as you're building a relationship with someone and you love them enough to point something out, you could say, there's this thing that you say, or there's this thing that you do that kind of takes away from who you are and who God's making you to be. And I wonder if you could reconsider that. Now, if all of you go out and try that this week, then Matt's phone will be ringing off the hook with all these problems you've created. But you think about it, I mean, there are people that you care enough that you're going to get involved, or you're going to say, take them out for a cup of coffee, and or take them with you to the grocery store or whatever. And everybody's going to wear masks and nobody's going to know who you are. And just say, hey, I'm seeing this thing. I'm seeing this pattern in your life that happens over and over and over. And I'm wondering what's causing that. And could I help you, maybe change that a little bit? And sometimes we come at it as, who do we think we are to say something like that into somebody else's life? Well, certainly we're not perfect, but we are God's hands and feet. And so in our own imperfection, knowing that we're not high and mighty, knowing that, if you're ready to go tell somebody off, then you need to go pray some more about it. If you're just reluctant and this is the last thing that you want to do, then you're probably in the right spirit to go and have that conversation. But we need to, iron sharpening iron in a practical way. And some of you may be thinking of somebody right now that that you've seen them repeat mistakes, or you see that they're stuck and you love them and you want to help them, but you don't know how to help them. Well, sometimes even just bringing it up is somewhat helpful. Now, you may offend them for a while. They may even go away. But the reality is people tend to come back to the last person who told them the truth.
Yeah. And just the power of self-discovery, like if we end our meetings just with, so what are we going to do about what we've been talking about, or
Yes.
what we're talking to me about, and people can self-discover, what the Holy Spirit is saying.
Yeah, and I read a fair amount of curriculum, and I've actually started writing the curriculum such that the last question in any given meeting is based on what we've studied today. Set a goal for yourself for the coming week, and whatever that goal is, and then seek somebody out in the group, to maybe help support you in achieving that goal. Then the next week, at the beginning of the meeting, we'd say, now some of you, or all of you, set a goal for yourself this last week, or you took on an assignment. Share with the group how that's going, the progress that you made. And you'll get everything from, oh, I forgot about that, to I did okay, but not great, and I needed to try some more, or here's my success that I had in that. But it's that idea of, you're not putting this on them. I mean, the only kind of accountability people like is the accountability that they request. But if they say, okay, I really do want to make an effort, instead of just thinking about this, to be able to follow through, and sometimes just knowing that I'm going to set a goal, I'm going to state that goal to somebody else, and then I know that somebody's going to ask me about it. That's enough accountability that's going to keep me motivated in moving forward. And that works with anything, whether you want to lose weight or get out of debt, or, get up earlier in the morning, or, whatever. But, how is it that and maybe it's the way that we talk to people. Maybe it's our attitudes toward people that we need to work on. I know I'm really getting into, we thought, oh, this was going to be a nice meeting. You're having so much fun in the other room. I heard you, and now you're coming in here and it's like all serious. But, what if Jesus meant what he said?
Yeah. So let me take you back to something you said earlier. You said if there's one thing you could help group leaders with, it's to not do everything yourself.
Yes.
So what are some practical tips to help share ownership in the group?
Yeah, well, the most practical tip is the way that you invite them to participate. And so if the invitation goes, would anybody like to? Then they'll say, oh, well, we need to go pray about that. And then they'll come back and they'll say, the Lord has spoken to me. And the Lord has said that he wants me to continue to be comfortable and that you should do everything. So how does it work? You don't give them a choice. You say, here's a sign-up sheet. And you could have a calendar. Here are the meetings. Here are the responsibilities, whatever those responsibilities are. So it could be leading the discussion. It could be leading part of the discussion. It could be hosting the group at your home. It could be bringing refreshments. And then you say, here's what we're going to do. Everybody's going to sign up for something. And they're going to say, why are we doing it this way? Well, you say, well, we're doing it this way because of COVID. Everything's because of COVID. Or you say, Pastor Matt told us this is how we have to do it from now on. Blame it on him. Or we saw this guy on Zoom, and we're not really sure who he is. He was kind of strange, and he told us we should do it. But it actually works. And so I used to lead a men's group. Now, we met at restaurants at lunchtime. It was called Allen's Out to Lunch Group because we were out to lunch, and it was a little out to lunch. And so we met. So we had a restaurant. We had a place. We had food because we ordered a meal. And so the only thing we had really to give away was leading the discussion. So I handed around a calendar around the room, and we knew that it worked because one week I'm sitting across the table from a guy who's exactly half my age. And he is leading a discussion from a study guide that I had written. And he's doing a great job. And the only problem was the other guys at the end of the table kept making fun of the questions. And I'm like, hey, I'm sitting right here. So if you say, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. Today is the first and only day that I'm going to lead the discussion. We're going to pass around a sheet. Everybody sign up. If you have refreshments and hosting and stuff, clearly refreshments will go first. That's the easiest thing to do. But if you say this is our expectation, then everybody takes a turn. The other way to go is kind of the theory of you spot it, you got it. So somebody says, well, I think our group should do more social activities. Okay, why don't you plan one for us? And somebody, I think our group should serve in the community. Okay, why don't you plan that for us? And it'll do one of two things. It'll either motivate other people to get involved and to do things that they feel like would be good for the group, or it will get them to shut up and never bring that up again because they don't want to do it. So, but I think there are great ways to get people involved, recognize their giftings. I mean, not everybody's gifted to lead, not everybody's gifted to, make a dessert. They can just follow the recipe on the box, right? But I think to give them the opportunity and to be a little more insistent about it. And then your responsibility is to make sure that the meeting happens. But and even other responsibilities down to inviting people or following up after people who are absent or whatever else. All of those things are things that you can hand off to somebody else. I like to say it's kind of like Tom Sawyer when he was painting the fence and he got everybody else to paint the fence. The only thing is, if you remember that story, as a small group leader, you can't charge your members to do that. So
true, yeah. So let me throw a tough one at you here.
Okay.
So our group members have varied backgrounds, varied personalities, varied opinions, varied views on all sorts of things. And sometimes that can create a little bit of conflict, a little bit of tension in the group meeting. How do we manage that in a healthy way? Just what are some initial thoughts you might have about that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big subject, especially now. We've got, the maskites and the anti-maskites and, all of those things. But there could be a lot of other, whether it's political or whether it's a team you root for or, anything else. I think the main thing is that it's kind of like being in a family. We could have a difference of opinion, but we're all related and we all love each other. And when it's all said and done, we're all going to love each other. Jesus said that people will know that we are Jesus's disciples because of our love for one another. And then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, love your enemies. So who are we not to love, right? And so I think there's a place where we can let people be heard appropriately if it's pertinent to our discussion. We don't have to let everybody talk about everything they want to talk about.
Yeah.
We could say that's a whole can of worms and we're not going to cover that right here. But I know that we have some very good friends that are taking some very radical stands on things right now. And we're just like, what happened? What happened to them? Why are they going that direction? And so you still love your friend. And I think there's a place to give them a hearing. And I think there's also a place to agree to disagree. If you're not seeing things, but the main thing is to keep front and center, what's the purpose of what we're doing? How is what we're doing helping us to become more like Christ? And arguing and trying to prove your point and trying to be right about everything is not necessarily the tool to help us reach our goal. And Jesus challenges on that in a lot of places, that he basically asked, is it better to be right or is it better to be good? And so, this issue is going to pass. Coronavirus is not going to be around forever. The current political climate is not going to be around forever. And of course, chances are all of this could become much worse. But do you think of things that we were concerned about 10 or 20 years ago? And those things are not a concern right now. Those are things that are not an argument right now. They're not a discussion, they're a distant memory. And so the same is going to be true of what we're doing now. This is going to be a distant memory at some point, even though it feels very front and center. And so I think that we just have to be careful with people. I think if we let them have, give a hearing, we need to give a fair hearing and let everybody contribute. I think if people can come to a point to agree to disagree. Of course, the other way to go is just to avoid the subjects altogether. And if it gets started, just to say, hey, this Bible study is focused on this topic today, and we're not going to go there. Or we're going to have to save that for another time. And we just keep saving it for another time and save it and save it, save it, and then it goes away. Because I think, again, we have to keep our primary purpose front and center, and and not allow it to deviate from that. But I know there's a lot of, the problem we have right now is that in any argument, people will very quickly run out of logical reasons. And so once you run out of logical reasons, you go to emotional reasons, and nothing good is going to come out of that. And so sometimes you just tell a friend, they state their piece, and then you just look at them and you give them a hug and you say, you know what, I just want you to know I love you. And then you just, move on. You don't have to camp there.
Yeah. So let me give one last question to you. So our groups don't have to last until Jesus comes back. Groups have life cycles, right? They don't last forever.
They do.
So talk to us about group life cycles. How do you know when maybe your group has run its course and it's time to step out and start a new one? Just talk to us about some of those dynamics.
I think that years ago, somebody explained it this way. They said a group starts out and they kind of have a cutting edge, and they have an edge of truth. And they can speak the truth in love, not knock somebody's block off. But when something comes up, they can, kind of point it back to the people, back to the truth of God's word. That after a point in time, a group becomes more understanding of each other. And so, somebody's, exhibiting a certain behavior, and you say, oh, well, that's terrible. And, we got to give them the truth of God's word. We got to point them in the right direction. But then after a while, you begin to understand why that person's exhibiting that behavior. And maybe it's a reaction to a spouse or a trauma or whatever else. And then we start to excuse it, and we're not challenging on it. Granted, there's going to have to be a lot of help to remedy that. But, when a group loses its edge in truth telling and becomes very understanding of each other, then I think at that point it's an indication of maybe we've lost our edge. The other thing with the group is that when a group has stopped inviting, and they've also stopped doing any kind of service or outreach as a group together. So there's no outlet for ministry, or they're not bringing people in, then it's kind of the beginning of the end of a group, just because eventually that group's going to dwindle down. Now, mathematically, if you look at like a site like smallgroup.com, you'll find, probably if you put in small group life cycle, you'll find about 20 different models of small group life cycle. And where they typically go is this, that after about 18 to 24 months, a group begins to decline in its effectiveness. However, it's at that point that the group has to make a decision. One decision would be that we're no longer going to meet in this group. Everybody that's had a group for 2 years is getting really nervous right now. And so just take a breath. And so you can decide, okay, well, we need to disband. Some of these people in our group could go out and start a group and all of that. However, the other decision you can make is that maybe you want to re-up. But in re-upping, you need to consider your group agreement. You make sure that what the group's purpose is being fulfilled, that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you need to, open it up so that other people are coming in and making a real effort for them to feel comfortable. I led a men's group at our church in South Carolina, and I led it for 4 years. It's the Out to Lunch group I mentioned. And at the end of 4 years, I had left the church at that point. So I kind of felt like I was part of the church's past and the group was part of the church's future. So that wasn't going to necessarily jive. So at that point, I had one original member of the group after 4 years, but we had about 10, 12 guys who would meet for lunch. So I deputized one of the members of my group that I knew really well. And then he led the group for the next 4 years. And then he handed the group off to some guy that wasn't in the group when I was there that I don't even know. And then he led the group. And so was it the same group? Yeah, I don't think they called it Alan's Out to Lunch group anymore, but it was the same group. But it's almost that, the notion that you never cross the same river twice. That over the years, because you had members come and go, there was some continuity, but there was no one member that stayed with the group through the whole 10 years or however long it lasted. Well, I think in that, as you continue to invite people in and you have current members, then you can keep going. But again, 1.5 to 2 years is probably the threshold. And for some of you that, you've been putting up with some of those rascals for going on 18 months, you're like, oh, yay, this is my out. And you know what? It could be. It could be. But again, something you make it a matter of prayer. It's not, it's not a rule. I know some groups that go 6 weeks and that was too long for them to go just because of that. But I know other groups that have been going on for 30 years. And, it really depends on how they're handling things and what they're doing. And, if they're all sitting around in the coffee shop or Panera Bread, I've noticed around here, good grief, all retired people hang out at Panera Bread and they're all complaining about the government. They're all complaining about their team. And they're all complaining about the parts of their bodies that hurt. And I thought, Lord, deliver me for ever being at Panera Bread. In fact, I went there once and I heard what was going on. I thought, I don't want any of this to rub off on me. And I was out there.
So let me just put it out to everybody. Does anybody have just a question you want to shoot to Alan just for fun? See what he has to say about it. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I guess maybe just like suggestions or tips on if you have like a couple in a couples group that would maybe fit better, or you feel like that they could maybe get more growth from like a different type of couples group that was maybe I think everybody can grow in a group because we all have things in common, but if you felt like that they could just maybe grow more so, or maybe meet more people that are just more like them, I don't know. Like tips or just suggestions on actually making that suggestion or like hooking them up with trying to get someone else.
Could you hear that, Alan?
I can hear part of it. Could you reiterate it for me?
So I'll correct me, Allie, if this isn't quite right. But if you want to suggest to someone in the group that maybe there's another group that would meet their needs better than your group does, but you don't want that to come across in any type of offensive way.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Any thoughts there? You stumped him, Allie.
Well, I know what I want to say, but I'm having to filter pretty hard. Okay, so I have to ask a follow-up question. Why do you want them out?
Well, we don't necessarily want them out. We thought maybe that if they were in a group with maybe even like some people that are closer to their age, their stage in life versus what everyone else in our group is, or
Are they older or younger?
they're older.
Oh, well then have the group at like 9 o'clock at night.
I'm not.
Survivor.
That's me. I was out on the West Coast this week and I'm like, it's like 7 o'clock. I'm like, I can't keep my eyes open.
So, Allie, do you feel like maybe they want to go to another group, but they don't want to say that?
We don't know.
It's just, yeah.
I don't want to get too specific, but I guess I was just kind of wondering tips, like in that way, if there's like a way to be nice, or even maybe you have some suggestions about how we can put them up, with another group. I mean, obviously it's not our job to decide what's the best group
Right,
for them,
right.
but you can't help but know just like life experiences and other things that have happened, and then you hear about other groups and you think of those
Yeah.
people and you're like, oh wow, that would be a really great group, and they would make probably stronger connections and friendships and be able to grow more, if that makes sense.
So are they fairly recent to your group?
Yeah. Like,
I mean, I've had some groups that were multi-generational and you can kind of learn from other people's experiences, but then also sometimes they're just such, distinct differences. You don't, watch the same things, talk about the same things. I mean, life is just, very, very different. Yeah, that's a tough one. But it could be that, there's another group that would invite them. That might be the way to go. And so find somebody that leads an older group, look around, see who's there, and say, hey, would you do me a favor? And would you invite this couple into your group, because they might enjoy fellowship there more than that they would in our group. And maybe that's a way see if it works. I mean, they don't get the hint and they say, no, we like the group that we're in. Well, then you're gonna have a little bit of a harder problem. But it's kind of a tough one. And I guess it depends on the scale, how big of a problem it is. I mean, if they were doing something bad, if they were, gossiping about members of the group or stuff like that, well, then you just, take a little Barney Fife philosophy and nip it in the bud. But if they're just kind of nice and there and out of place, they're not really doing anything wrong. But I would maybe see if somebody would be willing to invite them over. I mean, the other route would be to say, hey, there are a lot of older people in our church that are interested in being in a group. Have you ever thought about leading a group? Would be the way. And of course, the other side is, we can't go backwards, but even in the future, to be able to, kind of put a description of who your group is and even the ages of it, then you can kind of limit, who's going to be in a group, because no group is truly for everybody. And so I don't know if that's helpful or not.
yeah.
It is, thank you.
And I like what you said too. I mean, intergenerational groups can have their own power and advantage. And so, maybe they like the intergenerational experience, and maybe it's good for the younger people too.
And if none of that works, then just tell them Pastor Matt needs to talk to you.
Thanks, Alan. All right. Any other, just moving on? No. Any other questions from anybody before Alan has to go? All right. Parting word of encouragement, perhaps, before you go?
Well, I know that this is a very unusual season in a lot of ways. And I know everybody is kind of stressed out and, everything going on in the world right now, everything going on with, just so much change that we've experienced in the last 18 months. Don't give up on the good things that you're doing. Follow up after people, and know that what you are doing is making a difference. Because Jesus in you, even on the days when you've had it, even on the days when you're stressed out, even on the days when your kids are not cooperating or your spouse is not cooperating or whatever else, Jesus is still shining through you. He's there. And it's not something that you have to work up. He's there. And so know that you're being proximate to people, you're being present with them, you're making yourself available to people is making a difference. And some folks, it's the little bit of encouragement that they need. And some folks, it may be the only thing that they have to hold on to right now. But what you are doing is important. And Pastor Matt did not pay me to say that. But, the churches as institutions don't have great reputations right now in the world. But somebody who is willing to serve, someone who is willing to love, someone who's willing to take an interest in another person speaks volumes. So keep doing what you're doing.
Well, same to you, Alan. Thanks for being with us today. Your words of encouragement and wisdom, we appreciate that. And so thank you for your time, and we will sign off for today.
Thank you. Thank
All
you,
right.
everybody.
Bye.